In the vibrant, swinging heart of London during 1969, an extraordinary story began. Two young Australian friends, John and Ace, were wandering through the famous Harrods department store. They were casually browsing the exotic animal department, a practice that was shockingly legal at the time. Amidst the chaos of the busy store, they spotted something utterly heartbreaking. A tiny, incredibly fluffy lion cub was sitting alone inside a cramped cage. The cub looked lonely, completely out of place in the cold, artificial environment of the city. John and Ace felt an immediate, undeniable connection to the little golden creature. They simply could not bear the thought of leaving him in that tiny box. In a moment of pure, spontaneous compassion, they decided to buy the lion cub. They named him Christian and brought him back to their cozy basement apartment on King's Road. The bustling, rainy streets of London were an unusual home for a future king of the savannah. But from the very first day, Christian was showered with absolute, unconditional love. He was not treated as a wild beast, but as a beloved, cherished member of the family. The tiny cub quickly grew accustomed to his eccentric new urban lifestyle. He loved riding in the back of their convertible car, watching the city go by. He spent his afternoons playing playfully with local children in a nearby churchyard. Christian was incredibly gentle, possessing a sweet, affectionate nature that charmed everyone he met. He would curl up on their laps, purring loudly like an oversized golden house cat. The bond between the two young men and the growing lion was truly something magical. They communicated through soft nudges, playful wrestling, and deep, trusting gazes. For a short, beautiful while, their basement flat was a perfectly harmonious sanctuary. Love had completely bridged the massive gap between humanity and the wild apex predator. But nature has a powerful, undeniable rhythm that cannot be ignored forever. The tiny, fluffy cub was growing rapidly, eating pounds of raw meat every single day. The cozy basement was slowly shrinking around the majestic, expanding king. As the months joyfully passed, Christian transformed from a playful cub into a powerful juvenile lion. His golden mane began to sprout, and his roar started to vibrate through the floorboards. Despite his massive size and terrifying strength, Christian never lost his gentle, loving personality. He still greeted John and Ace with enthusiastic, heavy hugs that knocked them to the floor. He would affectionately wrap his massive paws around their shoulders in a tight, loving embrace. But the reality of keeping a growing apex predator in a city was becoming undeniably clear. Christian needed vast, open spaces to run, hunt, and truly be a lion. The churchyard was no longer sufficient for his boundless, surging wild energy. John and Ace loved Christian far too much to ever lock him in a zoo. They knew that a concrete enclosure would permanently crush his beautiful, vibrant spirit. They faced an agonizing, heartbreaking decision born entirely out of pure love. They had to find a way to return their best friend to his rightful home. The wild, sprawling savannas of Africa were calling out to Christian's ancient instincts. It was a terrifying prospect, as Christian had absolutely no wild survival skills. He had never hunted for his own food or interacted with another wild lion. Returning a captive raised lion to the wild was considered completely impossible by most experts. But John and Ace were absolutely determined to give Christian the freedom he deserved. They contacted legendary conservationist George Adamson, famous for his incredible work with lions in Kenya. George listened to their extraordinary story and agreed to help Christian transition to the wild. It was a massive, incredibly risky leap of faith for everyone involved. The young men had to pack up their beloved friend and travel across the world. The journey from the grey streets of London to the golden plains of Africa began. It was a deeply emotional farewell to the only home Christian had ever known. They were terrified of what the future held, but their love guided their brave choice. They were ready to let their beloved king reclaim his true throne. The arrival in the vast, breathtaking wilderness of Kenya was a massive culture shock for Christian. He stepped out of his transport crate and felt the hot African sun for the first time. The endless golden grass and towering acacia trees were a sharp contrast to London's concrete. George Adamson gently and patiently guided Christian through his difficult, crucial rehabilitation process. Christian had to learn how to be a wild lion from the very absolute beginning. He was introduced to an older, experienced male lion named Boy, who became his mentor. Boy taught the city lion how to stalk prey, mark territory, and survive the harsh wilderness. John and Ace stayed in Africa for a while, helping Christian adjust to his new life. It was incredibly painful for them to watch their cuddly pet learn the brutal laws of nature. but their hearts swelled with immense pride as they watched Christian slowly embrace his wild heritage. His muscles grew lean and powerful, and his golden coat gleamed under the blazing sun. He was no longer a curious pet riding in the back of a fancy convertible car. He was transforming into a magnificent, confident king of the African savanna. When the time finally came for John and Ace to leave, the goodbye was deeply heartbreaking. They hugged Christian one last time, burying their faces in his thick, golden mane. They walked away, leaving their best friend in the vast, beautiful, and dangerous wilderness. They returned to England with heavy hearts, constantly wondering if he would survive. The experts warned them that Christian would quickly forget them in the wild. They said that a wild lion's instincts would completely erase any memory of human affection. For an entire year, John and Ace waited anxiously for any news from George Adamson. They held on to the beautiful memories of the gentle giant who slept in their basement. But deep down, they accepted that Christian now belonged entirely to the wild. They believed they would never, ever see their beloved golden friend again. But the incredible power of their bond was about to completely defy scientific expectations. A year after leaving Christian in Kenya, John and Ace received an astonishing, wonderful update. George Adamson reported that Christian was not just surviving, he was absolutely thriving. The former city lion had successfully formed his very own wild pride. He was completely independent, hunting for himself and defending his vast, sprawling territory. This incredible news filled John and Ace with an overwhelming, desperate desire to see him again. They decided to travel back to Africa, hoping for just one final glimpse of their friend. But George Adamson issued a very stern, serious warning before they arrived. He told them that Christian was now a fully wild, incredibly dangerous apex predator. He had not interacted with humans for a year and had entirely embraced his predatory nature. The experts warned that Christian might not recognize them at all anymore. Even worse, he might perceive them as a direct threat to his new wild pride and attack. Approaching a wild male lion in his own territory was considered absolute, suicidal madness, but John and Ace's profound love for Christian completely overshadowed their fear. They flew back to Kenya, driving deep into the heart of Christian's expansive new territory. The African landscape was stunningly beautiful, but it felt incredibly vast and intimidating. They spent days searching the Golden Plains, scanning the horizon for a familiar golden mane. The anticipation was agonizing, a mixture of profound hope and terrifying uncertainty. They wondered if the gentle cub they raised was truly gone forever. They finally arrived at a rocky outcrop where Christian's pride was known to rest. The jeep slowly rolled to a stop in the dry, dusty African heat. John and Ace stepped out of the vehicle, their hearts pounding violently in their chests. They stood completely exposed on the open savanna, calling out Christian's name into the wind. The silence of the wilderness was suddenly broken by a deep, powerful rustling in the bushes. A massive, fully grown wild lion slowly emerged from the thick brush. The magnificent lion standing before them was breathtakingly huge and incredibly powerful. His mane was thick and dark, framing a face that was purely wild and untamed. It was Christian, but he was no longer the cuddly cub from the London basement. He stared intently at the two men standing near the jeep, his golden eyes locked on them. The tension in the hot African air was absolutely thick and terrifyingly palpable. For a few agonizing seconds, time seemed to completely stand still on the savanna. Christian took a few slow, cautious steps forward, his massive muscles rippling under his coat. He lowered his head, observing the strangers in his territory with intense, predatory focus. The experts' warnings echoed loudly in the minds of everyone watching the scene unfold. This was the exact moment where the wild instincts should have completely taken over. But then, something absolutely miraculous and completely unforgettable happened. Christian suddenly stopped, his ears perking up as he stared closely at John and Ace. A flicker of profound recognition seemed to violently spark in his ancient, golden eyes. The massive wild lion suddenly broke into a full, joyful, bounding sprint toward the men. He wasn't charging to attack. He was running with the pure excitement of a lost child. John and Ace opened their arms wide, tears streaming freely down their smiling faces. Christian leaped up, throwing his massive, heavy paws completely around their shoulders. He knocked them playfully to the ground, burying his huge head into their chests. He grunted and purred with an overwhelming, deafening volume of pure, unadulterated joy. He licked their faces affectionately, gently wrapping his powerful jaws around their heads in a loving embrace. The wild apex predator was hugging his human fathers with absolute, boundless love. It was a stunning, beautiful display of affection that completely defied all laws of nature. The bond they forged in a London basement had perfectly survived the brutal African wilderness. The reunion of Christian the lion and his human friends is a profoundly beautiful miracle. It was entirely captured on film, becoming one of the most heartwarming moments ever recorded. It completely shattered the rigid, scientific belief that wild animals cannot feel deep, enduring love. Christian even proudly introduced John and Ace to his new wild lioness companions. He allowed the men to sit peacefully amongst his wild pride without any hint of aggression. The sheer trust and gentleness he displayed were absolutely breathtaking to witness. For a few glorious hours, the divide between humanity and the wild was completely erased. John and Ace eventually had to leave, but this goodbye was entirely different from the first. There was no sadness, only a profound, overwhelming sense of peace and absolute joy. They knew for a certainty that their beloved Christian was incredibly happy and perfectly free. The story of Christian the lion remains a powerful, shining beacon of hope and positivity. It proves that compassion and genuine respect can transcend the deepest, most primal boundaries. When we treat animals with pure love, they are fully capable of loving us back unconditionally. Christian's joyful sprint across the savannah is a glorious celebration of true freedom. He represents the magnificent beauty of an animal returning to its rightful, natural place. His story inspires us to protect these magnificent creatures and their wild, sprawling homes. We do not need to lock animals in cages to experience their incredible magic. The greatest act of love we can ever show a wild animal is letting it go. Christian's massive, loving embrace reminds us of the profound connection we share with all living things. The world is often dark, but stories like this shine with a brilliant, undeniable light. They remind us that miracles are absolutely real, and they are born from pure kindness. The legacy of Christian the lion will continue to warm human hearts for generations to come. He was a true king, not just of the savannah, but of love itself.